welcome you to this new video about coaching and program management skills for the European Federation of Local Government Chief Executives, UDIT. In previous videos, we saw that everything we do, how we behave, is directly related to the way we process information and how this information is filtered through our minds constantly, through, among others, that combination of metamodels which makes us to act and behave in a particular way or another. We saw the characteristics and peculiarities of these patterns, the proactive-reactive pattern and the distance approach pattern. The following metamodels we'll see today will be the internal-external, options, procedures, global detail, and finally the similarity and difference frameworks. Well, let's go with the first metamodel, the internal-external framework. If you are the kind of person who trusts your own judgment to make decisions, or you know for sure when you have made a good job, it's very likely that you lean for internal framework. But, on the other hand, you need feedback from others to check that you did a good job. You would be within the external pattern. The key of this meta-program lies on finding out where we are and the things that motivate you and that you may need in order to judge your actions and make your decisions and consequences for you or for the others. For example, a superior officer, a mayor, a council, all of them newcomer to a job without previous experience in a similar position, usually have an external framework, but as they learn about the job, the balance will shift towards an internal reference framework. The same applies to your staff. Find out what is the framework of the staff, and they shall be permanently motivated. So, dear leaders, if you are the kind of person who have an internal framework, please do not forget to provide feedback to your staff. Your co-workers may have an external framework, and they will need some compliment, or they may want to know what they are doing and if they are doing well. Maybe you have ever found in your department a worker with a sharp internal framework, and communication with this person will get complex. Unless you explain very well the need for the results to be expected on his work, employees with inner tendency often are difficult to deal with, to work and to communicate. Such employees prefer to do things their way. People with external trend, however, are easier to relate with, as long as you understand that these people need your support and your permanent directions. But how can you determine if a person has an internal or an external framework? It depends upon the questions and the answers. Maybe a question of this type can be very useful. How do you know you did a good job? A person who uses an internal framework may be answering something like, I know when I've done a good job, while a person with an external framework may answer, well, other peers have seen it and they liked it. In terms of language, they will achieve greater level of communication and likewise detect their framework using phrases like, the best judge is oneself, I leave it to your discretion, look what you do, examine the facts, and then take the decision. When you do this, especially with someone whose framework is external, you might want to use phrases like, I'm sure they will give you the go-ahead. Your work and your project have been very well received, or certainly it will be fine. The following pattern is the one that distinguishes between options or procedures. If you are a person who prefers the choices, then you agree with me that you will enjoy trying new things. If you are a person who leans for the procedures, you will prefer to follow a specific procedure to do your work. Those who prefer the options love the variety, but if you go for procedures, you will be very good at starting new projects with very concrete patterns. If your tendency is procedural, you will prefer to follow clear rules, although it's likely that you may prefer these to be set rather than designing them for yourself. In verbal terms, people with a tendency to options will use sentences or words like, I'll decide when the time comes, or we must learn to play with the rules, let's try this new possibility, or even try to do the same otherwise. While people with a tendency to procedures will use words like, let's follow the established steps, respect the rules, systematically, first, second, third. The following framework is the one that distinguishes between global or detail. Some people are easier to understand a project or an issue globally, allowing them to set more general goals. Instead, there are others who prefer to conceive a project considering all the steps needed to reach the goal. There are a curious fact. People with tendency to details tend to dive into work without thinking about the impact of all the steps that can take to reach the desired goal. As a result, they may not ever reach the goal, or they will have spent a lot of energy and time on the project once they reach it. People who tend to work with a global perspective will understand things more easily, considering terms like general perspective, the global ideas from bird's-eye view. In 2 words, or essentially the idea of the project is as follows. While people who tend to detail will listen better and significantly will improve their level of communication and feedback when using terms such as plan, precisely, schedule, planning, preciseness, first, second, third, immediately afterwards, and so on. Be cautious when working with a superior or your mayor according to their own overall or detailed framework. If your mayor, supervisor, or councilman is a global kind of person, you'd better do a summary of your report instead of going into the details, because otherwise he will get remarkably bored and will not listen, and vice versa. Finally, the last framework is the one that distinguishes between similarity and difference. This meta program clarifies how you classify the information in order to understand or comprehend. That is, if you are a person who first notices the similarities between 2 situations that you already know, then you will have more a tendency towards a similarity framework. But if you are a person who first notices the similarity between 2 situations and then you realize the differences, then your tendency will be towards similarity with differences. However, if you realize what differs, then you will prefer classifying by differences. If you are a person with tendency to similarity with differences, the first thing you will do is looking for similarities and then for differences. You then have an evolutionary attitude towards change, in which case you will prefer to make changes every 4 or 5 years instead of abrupt changes. If you are a person that processes information basing on differences, then you simply evolve with changes. To discover the meta-program of a person in a specific context, and in the same way we've seen in previous videos, depending on question and answers, you might ask, what relation has this work with a previous work? A person looking for similarities will say, none. After all, I keep doing reports. Another person who works basing on similarity with difference might answer, well, I'm doing the same work, but now I have more responsibilities. And finally, a person who works basing on differences will say, well, it has nothing to do with what I did before, even this is not true. People who work according similarities will use words like the same, in common, similar, as always, identical, same as. Instead, those who work with similarity but with differences will use the words like the same, except that, rather than, overcome, gradually, less, however. Let's take an example. Let's imagine that your mayor or your superior works basing on similarity with differences. Maybe when showing him a report on a budget, for example, or when informing him about an objection, you might use sentences such as, the report is very similar to what we had previously talked about, or to what we had seen previously, but however, I chose to differentiate it from previous on. While to influence people with tendency to differences, it would be wiser to use words like as black and white, different, from scratch. I don't know if you will agree with me, but again, I invite you to practice along these days with the goal of mastering this tool. Thank you, and see you on next video.